The day you stop lying to yourself, the moment you let go of the story you tell yourself just to hold yourself together, is the moment when suddenly everything begins to make sense. This is not an audiobook designed to calm you, not a collection of pleasant phrases to sprinkle over your day. It is a clear, honest invitation to stop standing in your own way. You are not here to paint a better version of yourself. You are here to look, really look, with everything you carry, with what you have long felt but still defend. That is exactly where change begins. Each chapter confronts you. It may scratch you, it may heal you, but it won't leave you untouched. What you make of it is entirely up to you. Chapter 1. The origin, when the I am isn't yours. Since the moment you were born, someone else has been writing your story. You were nothing but a blank canvas, an innocent, vulnerable body with a newly awakened consciousness. And yet before you even knew it, others were already deciding who you would become. They gave you a name you never chose. They told you how to behave, what was right, what was wrong, and without realizing it, you soaked it all up as if it were truth. Because at that age you question nothing. You just accept. You need belonging, you need love, you need an embrace and the confirmation. You're okay just as you are, even when you don't yet know who you really are. Little by little, you filled up with definitions not of your own making. People said you were good, shy, smart, unfocused, complicated. You were like your father, your mother's hope, bad at math, overly sensitive, always looking for a fight. Phrases often spoken with love, sometimes carelessly thrown away. But they stuck, and you took them in, unaware of the depth of your acceptance. And how could you do otherwise? The voices around you were your entire universe. You didn't yet have a finished self. You were a shape others were trying to squeeze you into. They slapped labels on you, and you wore them as if they were part of your skin. And eventually, you began defending that frame as though it were really yours. Because what you learn early enough eventually feels familiar. And what feels familiar becomes your identity. You no longer say, "They told me I was like this." You simply say, "I am like this," with a conviction you hardly ever question. But if you pause for a moment, if you hush the external noise and truly look at yourself in silence, you will feel it. This I am does not represent you. It limits you. It squeezes you into a trimmed-down version of yourself, shaped by others' expectations. And that is not life. It is a play. The root of your identity, in many cases, was never a conscious choice. It was a process of passive adoption, an adaptation, a survival mechanism. Because let's face it, as a child, being yourself sometimes isn't safe. Sometimes it's easier to stay quiet, to bow your head, to function. You learn to avoid conflict, to conform, so you wouldn't be excluded, so you'd continue to be loved. And with that strategy, you began to suppress parts of yourself, the loud ones, the intense ones, the genuine ones, because they were too much for others. Thus, you started living by strategy. You created an identity that worked, socially acceptable, a version of you that didn't disturb anyone too much, and that became your I am. But it wasn't true. It was what you had to be to survive emotionally, to gain approval, to not be alone. And yes, it worked. It carried you through life somehow. But it also left a void. You feel that void when everything seems right, yet you remain restless. When you achieve what you were supposed to, but there's no real fulfillment. When you look in the mirror and don't recognize someone you chose to be, but someone you simply became because that was expected of you. Breaking out of that identity is damn hard. Because even in its pain, it's familiar. It's your home, no matter how dark. And the unknown is terrifying. To stop being who you've always been is a kind of symbolic death. It means disappointing others. It means questioning your parents, breaking silent vows you made without knowing, risking loss of people, bonds, security. And not everyone is ready for that. But if you're listening to this, something inside you refuses to hide any longer. Something that wants to be named, not with someone else's words, but with a voice that rises deep from your chest. Powerful, clear, unshakable. Because the true I am needs no explanation, no justification. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't adapt. It shows up. It stands its ground. And yes, that's frightening. Because the moment you begin proclaiming your I am with complete honesty, the world will react. Not everyone will applaud. Some will walk away. Others will look at you strangely. You'll have to withstand the external noise. But you will feel something perhaps never fully felt before. Inner belonging. That sense of truly inhabiting your body, your story, your life, authentically, wholly, truly. The first step is to look back, not to stay stuck in the past, but to understand when you began to forget yourself. Which sentences you adopted, which expectations you carried, which parts of your identity arose from fear rather than choice. Because as long as you haven't recognized that, you will keep repeating patterns that don't represent you, calling yourself by names that aren't yours, performing a play you never wrote. And that is exhausting. This chapter is not a call to battle with your past. It's not about finding someone to blame. No one emerges unscathed from childhood, but no one is doomed to repeat it forever. It's about shedding light on what shaped you without your choice. It's about radical honesty, about recognizing what you've taken in, swallowed, defended, out of fear, love, necessity. But you have a choice. And it begins with admitting that the I am you've lived by until now may not have been yours. That it was a construct, a compromise, a survival strategy. And that you have the opportunity today, here and now, to create a new I am. Not as a mask, but as an act of courage, as a decision. And that is the path we will walk together now. Chapter by chapter, no excuses, no retreat. Chapter 2. The Echo of the Lie. It starts quietly, almost harmlessly. A sentence, an opinion, a casual remark, perhaps uttered in the heat of the moment, perhaps in the belief it would shape or protect you. Yet it echoes, day after day, year after year. It is not forgotten. It takes root, not because it was ever true, but because you heard it often enough to eventually repeat it yourself. You're so complicated. You're too sensitive. You'll never amount to anything. Pull yourself together. You've always been difficult. It sounds like background noise, but what you don't notice is that those sentences become voices in your head. And sooner or later, you no longer need anyone else to say them aloud. You say them yourself in your thoughts, your decisions, your body language. You replay what kept you small. You give those phrases weight, space, power. And that is when the lie becomes reality. Not because it ever was real, but because you stopped questioning it. What began as someone else's opinion is now your own conviction. And that is the most insidious thing about inner lies. They sound like your voice. They carry your tone, your doubts, your uncertainties. They argue almost logically, and you believe them because they feel familiar. Because you have carried them so long, they no longer feel foreign. But they are. This inner voice that holds you back, that sabotages you, that constantly reminds you of what you supposedly can't do, is not part of your truth. It's an echo, a reverberation of old sentences you never let go of. And as long as you don't recognize that echo, You will follow it automatically, unconsciously, and you will build your life on your fear rather than your truth. The gap between who you are and who you believe yourself to be can be vast, but if you never check, you'll never notice. You'll get lost in your routine, doing your best to get everything right, while in the background an old story you never wrote plays on repeat. Without realizing, you have the power to say, stop, tear up the script, take back the stage. But you must be honest, brutally honest. And ask yourself, in which areas of my life do I act out of fear of being exposed? Where do I hold back because I believe I'm not enough? How many decisions do I make just to avoid someone discovering how deeply I question myself? And if you allow yourself to see that, to really see it, something will begin to tremble. Not an earthquake, no loud revolt, but a subtle, barely perceptible quiver in the structure you've spent years building out of protection, adaptation, and old lies passed off as truth. You begin to see that much of what you leaned on is hollow, that you relied too long on the voices that belittled you, that you thought you hid out of humility when really it was fear, that you believed you had to become better before you could show up when you were already enough. But the lie told you you weren't ready, not strong enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough. And that's the danger. These sentences aren't loud. They don't yell. They whisper. They are lazy, habitual, convenient. They keep you mediocre, not because that's who you're meant to be, but because they've trained you not to feel, not to risk, not to show up. These voices taught you to second-guess yourself before taking a step. And then you judged yourself for not moving forward. A perfect cycle of self-sabotage. An elegant trap dressed up as reason. But it's not reason. It's self-denial. What if you allowed yourself a moment to treat those inner sentences not as facts, but as old, flawed recordings? No longer memories stored in a body that remembers every tension, every holdback, every shame. And what if you begin right there to create silence? Not by shouting at the lie, but by refusing to listen. It takes courage to listen to yourself without filters, without excuses. But that is exactly where change begins. Not in frantic action, not in a headlong rush, but in pausing. In the space between the old echo and your new response. You don't need to know right away who you are, but you must know what you are no longer. And that starts with saying no to the lie. You don't have to believe everything you think about yourself. You don't have to stay loyal to sentences that shaped you, but no longer sustain you. You may redefine yourself. Not because you were wrong, but because you're tired of staying small just to avoid disturbing anyone, least of all yourself. And yes, it will shake. Those around you will feel it. Some will be puzzled, others will pull back. Because what you're doing is dangerous, in the best possible way. You're detaching from stories, roles, expectations. And with every step you take out of the echo, your voice becomes clearer, deeper, truer. The echo won't vanish immediately. It will remain. It will try again and again. But you will recognize it. You will hear the difference, and that changes everything. Because now you decide which tone to follow. You are no longer programmed. You choose. And from that choice arises a new self. Not perfect, not final, but genuine. And that is the only thing that matters. Chapter 3. The Mirror That Doesn't Lie. There is a moment you cannot plan. A moment that isn't loud or dramatic, but cuts deep. It sometimes happens in the morning, between brushing your teeth and the smell of coffee. Sometimes in the evening, when you're too tired to pretend. And sometimes in the middle of the day, out of nowhere. You stand before the mirror, look at yourself, and for a brief instant, everything falls away. The mask, the routine, the automatic smile. You see yourself, not as you want to present yourself, but as you truly are. And in that moment you realize, the mirror tells no stories. It remembers none of your excuses. It doesn't care how well you've adapted. It simply shows what is, without comment, without judgment, unshakably honest. You can ignore it, turn away, apply more makeup, distract yourself. But you know it's right, because it's the one truth you cannot manipulate. What you see in the mirror is not just a face. It's a state. It's the sum of your decisions, your fears, your escapes, your struggles. It's what remains when no one is watching. And often it's exactly what you don't want to see, because it shows how far you've abandoned yourself. There's no point in lying to yourself. The mirror doesn't lie. It reveals nothing you don't already know, but it takes away the possibility of further self-deception. Many go through life never truly seeing themselves. They run through days, roles, obligations, perfectly organized, seemingly stable. Yet there is always that moment when the image wobbles, not for others, but for you. Because deep down you know there's a gap between what you show and what you feel. And that gap cannot be filled with achievements, likes, or distractions. It remains because you no longer truly see yourself. But what does it mean to see yourself? It's more than just looking. It's recognizing the compromises you've made, the dreams you've shelved, the principles you've bent out of convenience. It's admitting you often lived out of fear, out of lack, hoping something external would confirm you. But nothing lasting, nothing real, nothing sufficient comes from outside. The mirror is cruel, some say. I say, it's mercilessly honest. And that is its gift. Because only where truth is can change occur. As long as you hide behind facades, nothing fundamental will shift. You'll spin in circles, constantly having to motivate yourself to hold it together, telling yourself it's okay, while inside, you feel it's not. The mirror moment is not a punishment, it's an invitation to reconnect with yourself, not the version that functions, but the one you've long ignored. The part of you that honestly says, I can't go on like this. I don't want to keep living against myself. I don't want to just survive. I want to feel. I want to reclaim myself. And that desire is the beginning. Not loud, not heroic, but real. And that is enough. You don't have to transform overnight. You don't have to be a different person tomorrow. But you must stop running from yourself. You must be willing to stop, look, and say, this is how I am right now. Not as I should be, not as others want me to be, but as I truly am. Maybe broken, maybe tired, maybe full of contradictions, but real. The moment you stop fighting your reflection, healing begins. Not because you become perfect, but because you stop denying yourself. There is no greater freedom than to look yourself in the face and refuse to run away. It takes courage. It takes patience. It takes honesty. But it is possible. You don't have to hate what you see. You don't have to regret what you've become. You only have to acknowledge it. Because everything you've done until now had its reason. And perhaps it was necessary to give you the strength to choose again, right here, right now. Truth hurts, but it heals. Lies comfort, but they destroy slowly. And you know it. You feel the difference. Maybe not in words, but in your chest, in your shoulders, in your breath. The mirror doesn't show your ideal image. It shows you. And when you're ready to truly recognize yourself in it, something will begin to grow. No new image, no goal for your ego, but a return to you, to your essence, to an I am based on inner clarity rather than external expectations. And someday, not today, maybe not tomorrow, you will look in the mirror again, and this time you won't look away. You'll nod, not because everything is perfect, but because you feel yourself again. And that is worth more than any praise, any recognition, any illusion. The mirror doesn't lie, and that is its greatest grace. Chapter 4. The words that bind you. Sometimes a single word is enough to shape an entire life. It often begins casually, unobtrusively, almost harmlessly. A childhood remark, a sentence said at the wrong moment, a repeated critique never meant seriously, but each time it cut deeper. Words are not air. They are substance. They burrow into your body, your mind, your self-image, and they stay long after the person who spoke them has forgotten. You collected them one by one. You're exhausting. Stop being so dramatic. You're nothing special. You can't do that. You'll see. Words never sold as shackles, but that's exactly what they became. And the tragic part is, eventually you began to say them yourself, not aloud, but inside, in thoughts you believe are your own, even though they never were. You replay them like an inner script you didn't write but know by heart. You use this language when you sabotage yourself, when you shrink back, when you face something that could be yours, but you don't allow it. Not because it's impossible, but because deep down you believe you don't deserve it. Language is not just communication, it's creation. The way you speak about yourself builds the walls of your inner world. If you tell yourself often enough that you're too late, you'll always feel rushed. If you tell yourself you're not good enough, you'll make yourself small in every room. If you tell yourself life is a battle, you'll live every day as a war. And eventually it's not just thought, it becomes reality. What many don't understand is that it's not about positive thinking or sugarcoating. It's about recognizing the power of language, how it shapes you, how it influences your posture, your decisions, even your body. The words you use in your mind reflect in everything: your gaze, your gait, your presence, your breath, your silence. If someone tells you for years, you're too sensitive, eventually, you'll feel that sensitivity as a weakness. Not because it is, but because the word itself has been poisoned. And so people start hiding precious parts of themselves just because someone else named them wrong. They conform linguistically. They alter their inner life to fit a picture that was never theirs. And you might have done the same. You began to fit yourself into words that don't empower you but keep you small. You say things like, "That's just how I am. I can't do that. That's not for me." And you mean it. You willingly adopted chains thinking they were part of your identity, but they were only part of your story. And story is changeable when you begin to rewrite it consciously. The first step is vigilance, not toward others, but toward yourself. Listen to what you say about yourself when you move unconsciously. What terms you use to describe yourself. Which sentences you repeat mentally when you fail, when you're tired, when you're alone. Those moments are when truth can break through, or when the lie continues to live. And perhaps you'll be startled when you truly listen, because you'll notice how little compassion you offer yourself, how quickly you judge yourself, how automatically you shrink, limit, retreat. But that shock is necessary. Without it, you'd keep speaking without realizing the harm you do yourself. It's not about fearing every word. It's about choosing consciously again. Words are tools. You can build with them or destroy with them. And no one speaks to you more often than you do. That inner voice. It influences how you view yourself, how you feel, what you deem possible. If it constantly cuts, you will bleed, even if no one sees it from the outside. But you can change that voice, not overnight, but step by step. You can become more mindful of your speech, not sweeter, not artificial, but clearer. You can begin to examine the words you carry. You can decide which words you want to hold on to and which to let go because they never truly belonged to you. Maybe you think, but I can't just pretend everything's fine. No, that's not the point. It's about finding words that move you, not freeze you. Words that encourage courage, not dazzle you. Words that remind you of who you really are deep inside, before anyone told you who you must be. When you talk about yourself, don't speak like someone apologizing. Speak like someone reclaiming themselves. Use language that creates space, that lets you breathe, that allows you to grow instead of shrinking. And you'll see, with every honest, clear sentence you establish within yourself, old shackles begin to dissolve. Not instantly, but inevitably. Chains aren't made of metal. They're made of syllables. And you already have the key. It lies in your decision to find your own language, one that doesn't hold you captive but supports you. And when you begin to speak that way, to yourself, about yourself, from yourself, something will change. Not just within you, but around you. Because words have power. They shape reality. And today, right now, you can choose the identity you truly give yourself.
Chapter 5. The Trap of Potential.
There is a word that at first glance sounds like a compliment, like recognition, like a quiet knighthood. Potential. You have potential. You could achieve so much. There's so much in you. Phrases you may have heard at school, at home, among friends, on the job, always in different forms. And with each repetition you believed it a little more. Not that you were living it, but that it existed somewhere inside you like a treasure waiting to be unearthed. And that is where the real problem begins. Because potential is only a promise, not a result. It's a hint of possibility, not reality. And paradoxically, the more you hear about your potential, the more you can lose yourself in it. Because eventually you start believing that having it is enough. You rely on the mere idea of what you could be to feel valuable. And without noticing, you build an identity based on what might be, rather than on what is. The danger of this trap is its comfort. As long as you believe in your potential, you don't have to prove anything. You can rest, make excuses, postpone, dream, plan, without risking. Potential is safe. It demands no confrontation, no failure, no public declaration. It's the perfect place to hide from your own greatness while still feeling special. But the truth is harsher. No one pays you for your potential. No one gives you respect for what you could have done. And the world won't celebrate you for what you might have become, if you dared. Applause comes not for ideas, but for execution. For courage, for conviction, for action. And you know this deep down. You know you've often hidden behind your potential. You've left projects unstarted believing the moment wasn't right. You've avoided certain relationships believing you had to work on yourself first. You've let opportunities pass because you thought you'd eventually achieve something far greater. You call it waiting, maturing, not being ready yet. But really it's fear. Fear of the moment when your real self must measure up to the idea you've built. Because what if you're not as capable as you believed? What if your talent isn't enough? What if your self-image shatters against reality? You avoid those questions by staying in the realm of potential. There you're untouchable, untested. And being untested feels safe. But it's not real. It's a cage of possibilities that masquerades as freedom because you've forgotten how real movement feels. Potential means nothing without discipline, without clarity, without tough decisions, without the daily unromantic grind. And the longer you wait, the harder it gets. Not because your potential fades, but because your doubts grow. Because you eventually forget whether you truly can or merely believed you could. And that gnaws at you. It erodes your identity. It makes you bitter, withdrawn, sarcastic. Because you sense you cheated yourself with a beautiful lie. The world is full of people with potential. Full of unwritten books. unlaunched businesses, unsaid words, unmade choices. And each of them carries a story about why it didn't happen. Too early, too late, too risky, too much, too little. But in the end, only one truth remains. They didn't do it. And that is the only thing that counts. Not what they could have done, but what they did. You must ask yourself if you want to escape this trap. What have I concretely done to live my potential? Not what have I thought, planned, dreamt, but what have I executed? Where have I risked pain? Where have I failed? Where have I shown up as a person with flaws, uncertainty, and courage, not as an idea? And if the answer disappoints you, it's not a disaster. It's a beginning, an honest beginning. Because only when you face your own comfort can you truly move. Only when you stop wallowing in possibility can you choose a direction, a pace, a tangible result. It's not about performing greatness immediately. It's about no longer pacifying yourself with someday. It's about ceasing to impress yourself with fantasies and instead getting concrete, taking a step, not perfect, not spectacular, but real, visible, tangible. Because only then will you feel yourself. Only then will you grow. You don't owe anyone proof that you're extraordinary. But you owe yourself the honesty to see whether you're living your life or merely talking about it. Whether you fill your days with meaning or with excuses. Whether you move or just pretend to be on the move. And if you start today to stop using your potential as an excuse and start treating it as a commitment, something will change. Then not only your self-worth but also your self-respect will grow because you stop waiting and start doing. And that is what truly matters. Chapter 6. The I am you avoid. There are facets of yourself you'd rather not speak. Not out loud, not in silence, not even to yourself. Not because they're wrong, but because they're uncomfortable. Because they would call everything into question. Because they don't fit the picture you've built of yourself. Or the one others expect. So you pretend they're not there. But they are. Always. Right beneath the surface. As a quiet hunch. As resistance. As a reaction you can't explain to yourself. This is about the versions of you you avoid. Because they would force you to face truths you'd rather not see. It's the I am you suppress because it doesn't fit your narrative. Maybe because it's too vulnerable, too angry, too wild, too honest, too demanding, or simply too real. And that's exactly why it's dangerous. Not for you, but for the system you've built around yourself to keep you safe. Because this I am questions everything. It tears the mask away. It calls you out of comfort, out of routine, out of the roles you play so well. It confronts you with what you know, but refuse to live. And that makes it uncomfortable, because you sense it would change you, because it would force you to take yourself seriously, not just what you can do, what you show, what you've achieved, but what calls out from within, even though you're always trying to drown it out. Many people spend their lives avoiding this I am. They live versions of themselves that are efficient, socially accepted, superficially intact, but underneath it all builds up something, an inner pressure, a tension that won't release as long as you deny part of your truth. And you feel it. You feel it in impatience, in irritability, in restlessness. You feel it in the silence when you suddenly don't know why you feel empty, even though everything is going right. Avoidance has its price, and it's steep. Because what you split off from yourself doesn't simply go away. It finds other ways out. In your body, in your relationships, in your choices. It flows into your posture, your speech, your dreams you no longer dream. And eventually you don't know whether you're the person you want to be, or just the sum of what you've learned to endure. The I am you avoid is not an enemy. It's the part of you that would make you whole. It's the shadow that reminds you you are more than your facade. And if you stop running from it, If you begin to give that part room, not to destroy you, but to set you free, then something changes. Not from the outside, from within. Because for the first time you become honest again. Not in words, in presence. It takes courage to confront this I am. Because it brings guilt, anger, shame, pain, old wounds you never tended because you thought you had to be stronger. But strength doesn't mean suppression. Strength means looking, feeling, and standing firm when it gets uncomfortable. Not running away, not losing yourself in the attempt to stay in control. Maybe this I am for you is, I am exhausted, I am angry, I am uncertain, I am no longer willing. Perhaps it's a side of you that yearns for freedom, for depth, for clarity, but you've pushed it away because it would demand too much change. And that's precisely why it's calling so loudly. Because it won't wait any longer. Because you can't wait any longer. Sometimes what you avoid most fiercely is exactly what could heal you. It's uncomfortable, yes. It's chaotic. It questions your structure, but it's real. And that's what makes you feel alive. Not your control, not your facade, but your courage to allow yourself everything that comes with it. Not only what looks good, also what hurts. When you begin to name this repressed I am, it loses its power. It becomes a part of you can hold rather than fight. And the more you do that, the freer you become. Not because you become better, but because you stop censoring yourself. You may not know immediately what this I am is exactly. You may only feel that something lurks there you've never truly allowed. But that's enough. It's enough to take the first step. It's enough to open yourself, to hear what you've been drowning out for so long, and not betray yourself in the process. You don't have to explain. You don't have to justify. You only need to begin trusting yourself. Not the image you show, but the part inside that's been waiting for you to get honest, to go quiet, to remember. What if you stopped hiding? Not from others, from yourself. What if you said, I am no longer willing to deny myself. I am no longer willing to bend to expectations. I am here. I am real. I am present. With everything I am, even what has had no place for so long. You don't need a new role. You need yourself. Uncensored, non-negotiable, unavoidable. Chapter 7. You are not your past, but your decisions. Sometimes you carry your history like a weight on your back, without realizing you've grown stronger than what once shaped you. You think you must continue defining yourself by what happened to you, by the mistakes you made, by what others inflicted on you, by what you never received. And as you try to move forward, you keep tethering yourself to what's behind you. Not because you want to, but because you never really left it behind. The past explains much, yes. It shows you where your patterns come from, where your insecurities root, why you react the way you do. But it doesn't determine who you are today, unless you give it that power. And that's the point where everything is decided, not by what was, but by what you do with it today. What truly shapes you isn't the circumstances you've been through, but the decisions you've made from them, whether consciously or unconsciously. Whether you closed yourself off or opened yourself up. Whether you fed bitterness or sought forgiveness. Whether you reinvented yourself or buried yourself in the old. Every person has breaks in their story. Yet not everyone lets those breaks define them. Some use their past as a shield. They justify themselves with it, protect themselves with it, explain their hesitation, their mistrust, their distance. And that's understandable. No one wants to be hurt again. No one wants to relive pain. But if you tailor your whole life to never feel what you felt then, you'll never truly arrive. Because you're not free. Because you're not choosing today. You're choosing yesterday. You can't undo what's been done, but you can decide what will come of it. And that's not just a comforting thought. It's a responsibility. One you can't delegate, because no one but you will live with the consequences of your decisions. No therapist, no partner, no environment. Only you, every day, with each step, with each yes and each no you give. Maybe you learned to shrink because you once found out that greatness is punished. Maybe you learned to distrust because someone disappointed you. Maybe you vowed never to show weakness again because your openness was exploited. And all that is real, all that left marks. But today, right now, you can decide whether those marks guide you or bind you. The past may be a chapter, but it must not write the script. If you make decisions today that serve only your past, you're not living, you're managing. And you'll feel it. In your aliveness, in your courage, in your ability to trust, to create, to show yourself. Decisions born from fear of repetition do not create freedom. They create control. And control is no substitute for healing. It's not about forgetting what was. It's about honoring it, acknowledging it, then lifting your gaze and asking, what do I choose now? What do I choose even though I was hurt? What do I choose even though I'm afraid? What do I choose even though it would be easier to stay in my old protective patterns? And that's the difference between reaction and decision. You can react automatically. You can only decide when you're conscious, when you pause, when you refuse to let your story pilot you to the same places, even though you want to go somewhere new. Your I am emerges in these moments, in how you speak to yourself when things go wrong, in the patience you give yourself when you fail, in the attitude with which you view what you once judged, and above all, in the courage to make decisions that aren't comfortable but are true. Perhaps that means opening up even though you learn to close. Perhaps it means taking responsibility even though you've played victim. Perhaps it means letting go even though you thought holding on was strength. And maybe that is the truest healing. Not through explanations, not through blame, but through decisions that shape your future rather than repeat your past. You are not what happened to you, but you are very much what you make of it. And as long as you refuse to acknowledge that, you'll keep finding yourself stuck in the same place, no matter how hard you try to move on. Development doesn't begin with motion. It begins with decision, with an inner cut that says, from here on, things change. Not perfectly, not easily, but genuinely. And you will notice it. Not immediately, but tangibly. Because you'll behave differently. Because you'll stop leaning on the same excuses. Because you'll stop seeking someone else to tell you what's right. Because you'll become the voice that guides you, not based on old wounds, but on what you've understood today. Decisions don't transform your life instantly, but they change your course. And with every step you take in this new direction, you prove to yourself that you're not trapped by what was, but capable of creating, feeling, choosing anew. And perhaps that is the greatest freedom of all. Not that nothing happened to you, but that you can still choose who you want to be. Chapter 8. The Conditioned Self-Destruction. You don't destroy yourself because you're foolish. You don't sabotage your life because you want it to fail. You do it because somewhere along the way, you learned it's safer to stand in your own path than to be disappointed by others. And this defense mechanism, this silent, sharp inner reflex, became a pattern over time. An automatic system you repeated so often that you stopped questioning it. You call it procrastination, perfectionism. I need to grow more. Now's not the right moment. But behind all those words lies the same fear. Fear of what happens if you truly show up, if you truly commit, if you dare to choose your potential, your truth, your greatness, and then fail. And that's why it's easier to block yourself before life can do it. Because as long as you hold yourself back, you at least maintain control. You train this self-sabotage like a muscle. You don't do it intentionally, but you're damn good at it. You enter relationships that keep you small. You take jobs that under-challenge you. You deny yourself what you give others unconditionally. Patience, understanding, value. And while you outwardly pretend to grow, you remain stuck inside. Not for lack of will, but because you've become too comfortable undermining yourself. You crack jokes about yourself before others can criticize you. You avoid risks before anyone sees your fear. You set goals you never achieve just to confirm to yourself you never can. And all of this feels protective. But it's a trap. Because what you do to yourself cannot be endured with pride. It leaves wounds, and eventually you mistake those wounds for your essence. You begin to believe you really are incapable, that you really are untrustworthy, that you simply can't follow through. But that's not true. You've only told yourself so often it feels like truth. And that's the insidious thing about self-destruction. It masquerades as self-knowledge, while it's nothing but the echo of old fear. Perhaps in childhood you learned you were only safe if you held back. Perhaps you were loved for being quiet, compliant, undemanding. Perhaps you were criticized when you wanted too much, were too loud, or too emotional. And one day you decided it was better to limit yourself before others could. Because you thought you were protecting yourself. Because you thought you'd be less vulnerable. And so you began sabotaging yourself. Not out of weakness, but out of a deeply ingrained survival pattern. You learn to interrupt yourself just before it gets serious. Just before you become visible. Just before something could succeed. And each time you do it so skillfully you can't even be angry at yourself. You always have good reasons, an explanation, a story that sounds logical, but inside it's nothing more than a rerun. The first step to break this is brutally simple and at the same time unbelievably hard. You must recognize it. Not from a distance, not theoretically, but in the very moment you do it again. When you don't finish the project even though you have the time. When you withdraw when closeness would do you good. When you put yourself down even though no one has attacked you. When you catch that moment, you have a choice. And that's where it gets uncomfortable. Because now you can't say you didn't know. Now it's on you. Now you can decide whether to feed the old pattern or to pause, breathe, and consciously take a different step. One that doesn't protect you, but reveals you. One that doesn't hold you back, but carries you. You won't master this immediately. You'll catch yourself and still carry on. You'll fall and get up again. But the more often you pause, the quieter that voice telling you you're not enough becomes. And the more often you choose not to abandon yourself, the clearer your inner compass becomes. Not because you reinvent yourself, but because you stop destroying yourself. You are not your behavior. You are not your pattern. You are not your armor. You are the person beneath. And that person deserves to be heard. Not only when you function perfectly, but especially when you stumble. When you show up even though you tremble. When you stay even though you want to flee. When you accept yourself, even though you learn to hide. Self-destruction is not fate. It's a learned system. And what's learned can be unlearned. Not by force, not by pressure, but by awareness. By decisions no longer born of fear, but of truth. And that truth tells you, you may hold yourself. You may correct yourself without annihilating yourself. You may grow without constantly diminishing yourself. In the end, you won't remember how many times you fell. You'll remember whether you stopped kicking yourself while you lay on the ground. And that's where your dignity begins. In the moment, you cease being your own enemy. Chapter 9. Identity through habit. You might think you know yourself. Because you know your name, your story, your reactions, your routines. You believe you are who you are, not because you ever truly chose it, but because it became ingrained, because it's familiar, because you've done it so long you stopped questioning it. And that's dangerous, because many people confuse habit with identity and don't notice they're living a version of themselves they never consciously chose. You wake up, get dressed, go to work, talk to the same people, think the same thoughts, avoid the same conflicts, react to the same triggers with the same patterns. And after years in this cycle, you wonder why you feel empty, why nothing truly fulfills you, why you can't sense yourself anymore. It's not because you don't do enough. It's because you're merely functioning, not living. Identity isn't born once. It forms daily, through action, through decision, through presence. But if you stop acting consciously, choosing consciously, feeling consciously, your identity stops evolving and calcifies. You repeat yourself, and the more you repeat, the more you believe you are that way, when really you just became that way, out of comfort, out of fear, out of lack of friction. And it's understandable. Life doesn't constantly force you to question yourself. It's easy to stay in the known pattern. It takes energy to redefine yourself. It's exhausting to face yourself honestly in a world that makes distraction easy. But the price of that ease is high. Because one day you wake up and don't recognize your own life. Not because everything changed, but because you no longer remember why you became what you are. You say, "I'm just introverted. I'm not the risky type. I need security." But where does that come from? Did you ever choose it? Or did you say it often enough that it felt true? You repeat certain phrases about yourself like mantras. But no mantra becomes true just by repetition. It only becomes familiar. And therein lies the trap. Most people don't question their identity because they never learned it's malleable. Because they thought they had to find themselves as if their true self were already written somewhere, waiting to be discovered. But you don't need to find yourself. You need to shape yourself. Not once, but constantly. You're not a static being. You're a process. And that process needs your conscious participation. Maybe at some point you chose to function. Maybe that was vital for survival. Maybe you adopted a role because it brought safety. Maybe you stopped asking for more because you learned questions were unwelcome. But what once was protection is now a cage, and as long as you don't recognize it, you'll mistake it for home. Identity through inertia means you don't live. You run on a loop. You don't choose. You react. You keep confirming yourself because you never consider real change. Not because you couldn't, but because you believe you are as you are, because you're used to it. And that's when you lose yourself without noticing. What you need isn't a new concept of yourself. What you need is awakening. A confrontation with the question how much of what you live daily really comes from you, and how much is simply adopted, imitated, carried on unconsciously. It's not about questioning everything you are. It's about at least waking up once and asking, if I started from zero today, what would I consciously choose again? Most people are exhausted not because they do too much, but because they no longer feel themselves. Because their actions have no inner source. Because they've lost contact with their inner voice. Not because they're weak, but because they eventually accepted that life just happens this way. And this is where quiet surrender begins. Not visible, but palpable. A little more each day. If you want to stop repeating yourself robotically, you need friction. Not externally, but within. You must disturb yourself. You must get in your own way. You must begin to see your habits not as given, but as results. And then decide whether to continue them or not. It's uncomfortable. It stirs unrest. It demands energy. But it gives back what you lost long ago. The power to lead yourself. You don't have to reinvent every part of you, but you must know what you live and why. You must surprise yourself again. Not with busy work, not with fleeing into the new, but with clarity, with the courage to pause, not because you're tired, but because you want to feel whether you still recognize yourself in your own life. And if you don't, it's not the world's fault. It's yours. Because no one forces you to repeat yourself. No one holds you in what you say, do, think every day. You're free. And that freedom is uncomfortable because it makes you responsible. But it's also liberating because it reminds you, you're not your habit. You're the one who can change it. Chapter 10. The I am, the world doesn't want to hear. When you first truly speak who you are, without justification, without apology, without making yourself smaller than you will feel a reaction. Not inside you, but in your surroundings. Because authenticity is not quiet. It's uncomfortable. Not because you raise your voice, but because you stop pretending. And that puts others in a bind they never expected. They see you as you are, and they don't know what to do with that. You learn that it's easier for people if you hold yourself back. You learn that you avoid conflict by meeting expectations. You learn that you earn belonging by fitting in. And eventually you believe that's the price you pay for love. Betraying yourself piece by piece in doses so small no one notices. Not even you. But then it happens. Eventually something breaks through. Not suddenly, but noticeably. You stop holding back, you stop dodging. You speak sentences you've thought for years, but never dared to say. You show up. With presence. With clarity. Not aggressively. Not condescendingly. Just genuinely. And that's enough to make walls quake. Because the I am you speak unsettles. It shifts the dynamics. It forces others to question their own conformity. And that hurts. When you say, I am enough without your approval, it goes silent. When you say, I won't bend just to make you comfortable, it turns cold. When you say, I'm not here to meet your expectations, but to live my life, you suddenly feel different eyes on you. You're no longer the one who yields. You're the one who stands up. And that doesn't fit the picture others have of you. Many people love you for what you represent to them, not for who you truly are. And when you stop offering that representation, when you begin living your truth, they feel threatened. Not because you take something from them, but because you remind them of what they've denied themselves. Your freedom confronts their conformity. Your clarity casts light on their repression. Your courage stirs the question they haven't asked in years. Who am I really? And what do I stand for? That's why the I am you speak won't win applause everywhere. Some will distance themselves. Some will quietly judge you. Some will label you arrogant because you no longer make yourself small. Some will find you difficult because you're no longer available for their old games. And yes, that hurts, because you were used to defining yourself by belonging. But here lies the turning point. You begin to define yourself by integrity, by truth, by what feels right for you, not for others. And although this can feel lonely at first, it gives you back something you long missed without naming it. Respect. Not others' respect. Your own. You go to bed each night without having to wonder if you played a role again. You wake up each morning wearing no mask. You are you. Even if it's uncomfortable. Even if you feel headwind. Even if you're suddenly less liked. But for the first time, you're genuine. And the price you pay is nothing compared to what you gain. Yourself. Not as a concept. Not as an image. But as a living, breathing reality. You need no consensus to know you're on your path. You need no constant feedback to stay on course. Because you feel it. And that feeling is stronger than any outside opinion. The I am the world doesn't want to hear is often precisely what you most need to say. Because it reminds you who you are, before you learn to pretend. Because it pulls you back from all the accommodations, all the half-truths, all the quiet surrenders you made under the guise of reason. You're not here to be accepted. You're here to live. And living means friction, means decisions, means not everyone will come along when you begin to take yourself seriously. And that's okay, because you're not made for everyone, but you are made for yourself. And once you've truly heard yourself, really heard, you won't be able to turn that volume down just to fit better. Maybe you'll lose things, people, structures, securities, but you'll gain something far more valuable, a life that flows from inside out. And this life, even if it demands of you, will never leave you feeling empty again, because you know you chose it, consciously, clearly, genuinely. Chapter 11. And when you have no clue who you are. There are phases in life when you no longer know who you truly are. Not because you lost yourself, but because you never really set out to find yourself. You went through the motions, met expectations, played roles, chased goals that at some point made sense, or at least seemed to. And suddenly you find yourself standing there in the middle of life, outwardly perhaps successful, socially connected, organized in your daily routine, but inside empty, questioning, exhausted. Not from doing, from not feeling. You try to cling to something that gives you security, to routines, to relationships, to ideas about how you're supposed to be. But none of that really holds, because you sense the foundation is missing, not on the outside, within you. And if you become honest, truly honest, this sentence emerges: I have no idea who I am. And as unsettling as it is, as much as it may shame or discourage you, it is not a sign of weakness. It is a beginning. To know who you are, you must first recognize what you never were. You must allow yourself to shed layers that never belonged to you, words that others handed you, images you adopted, decisions you made, not from your own core, but because you thought you had to. None of that simply falls away. It dissolves slowly when you stop forcing yourself to be clear before you've even felt what moves you. Maybe you never had the time to turn inward. Maybe you always had obligations, always responsibilities, always others who spoke louder than your own voice. And over time, that became a habit. Others first, then you. Maybe you even settled into it because it felt easier to be there for others than to confront yourself. And now you stand there, with the space suddenly freed, and you don't know what to do with yourself. This is not a deficit. It is an invitation. A rare opportunity to meet yourself in a way you perhaps never have before. Not through reflection alone, not through plans or definitions, but through genuine feeling. Who are you when you don't have to function? What remains when nobody expects anything of you? What emerges when you don't define yourself by performance, recognition, or belonging? This emptiness you feel is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is the space that arises when old identities crumble and new ones haven't yet formed. It is uncomfortable because it offers no grip, because you have no clear answers. But it is also honest, because it doesn't pretend, because it forces you to stand still, not out of weakness but out of maturity. You don't have to rush. You don't have to find yourself immediately. Who you are is not a goal to be checked off. It is a state that grows when you are ready to nurture it. And that begins with small things, with choices that feel right, even if they contradict what you've always done. With conversations that empower you, not just fulfill duties. With moments in which you define yourself not by achievement, but by your being. And you will make mistakes. You will try things that feel right at first, and then no longer fit. You will contradict yourself, doubt yourself, waver, and all of that belongs. Because you can't be summed up in a single sentence. Because you are more than a headline. Because you're constantly in motion, not chaotically, but vibrantly alive. Perhaps you also need a phase of return. A return to what you loved as a child, to what moved you before you learned to be cool, to what made you shine before you learned to restrain yourself. Often the key lies precisely there, not in new answers, but in old memories you honor enough to give them space again. You don't have to prove who you are, not to your parents, not to those around you, not even to yourself in moments of doubt. You only have to take yourself seriously when you sense it's time to stop living by others' rules. And that doesn't mean you have to abandon everything. It means you begin asking questions you've long suppressed. What feels good without any gain? Where do you feel alive without explanation? With whom can you be silent without feeling wrong? These aren't concepts, they are signposts. And if you follow them, you won't find clear answers immediately, but you will begin to inhabit yourself, not as an ideal, as a human, with fractures, with expansiveness, with uncertainty. Perhaps that is the most mature form of identity, not needing to define yourself in order to feel yourself, not needing to be perfect to be real, not needing to have everything under control to live in peace with yourself. You are not too late. You are not lost. You are at a point many never reach because they avoid it. And that alone is strength. Not because you have answers, but because you finally ask the right questions. Chapter 12. The masks that have settled. It doesn't start consciously. No one wakes up one morning and decides to wear a mask from now on. It happens in small moments. When you sense that your true face doesn't fit. When you notice your sadness feels too heavy, your joy too loud, your doubt too uncomfortable. You accommodate. You adapt. You smooth your edges. Not out of calculation, but because you want to belong. Because you don't want to risk rejection. And so you put on something, a smile, an attitude, a tone that works, that's expected, that remains pleasant. The more you use it, the more familiar it becomes, not because it suits you, but because it protects you. You become the person who is always strong, or the one who always understands. You become the doer, the perfectionist, the funny guy, the easygoing one. You become what is needed, not who you are. And because you receive praise for it, because you get by with it, because you feel safe in that role, you begin to mistake it for yourself. Not immediately, but slowly, stealthily, until one day you no longer know where you end and the mask begins. The greatest danger is not wearing a mask. The greatest danger is wearing it long enough that it becomes fixed, until it merges with your expression, your tone, your way of living. And eventually you forget that it was never part of you. You defend it, you justify it, you need it. Because without it, you'd be naked, unfiltered, unpredictable. And that is exactly what you've unlearned. It's comfortable to maintain an image that wins approval. It's reassuring to be predictable in your surroundings, in your behavior, in what others expect of you. But beneath that surface, something builds up, a quiet discomfort that won't go away, an inner mismatch. You function, but you don't feel whole. You speak, but you don't hear yourself. You are present, but you're distant inside. And you know, if you're honest, you're here, but you're not yourself. Because what you hide under the mask is not your flaw. It is your humanness, your contradictions, your wildness, your depth. What makes you unpredictable yet alive. And that becomes uncomfortable when you lock it away too long. Because it demands space. Not loudly, not dramatically, but persistently. It knocks. It reminds you. And eventually it rebels, in the form of fatigue, irritability, an inner emptiness you can no longer explain. You might notice it in relationships where you exert yourself but don't feel seen. Perhaps in a job where you excel but aren't yourself. Perhaps in moments of silence that you barely endure because they remind you of what you've unlearned to feel. And eventually you know, the mask no longer protects you. It imprisons you. And then the work begins. not by simply removing it. It's not that easy. It sits deep. It has grown with you. It has carried you for years. It would be unfair to condemn it outright. It was your tool, your shield, your strategy. Yet now you get to decide whether you still need it. Not everywhere, not at once, but bit by bit, where you want to breathe again, where you want to be yourself again, even if you feel more vulnerable, even if you don't know how others will react. The fear of showing yourself unmasked is not irrational. You have reasons for wearing it. You've had experiences that shaped you. But you're not the same person you once were. You're at a point today where you can bear more than you think. That doesn't mean you must reveal everything. It means you have a choice. And that choice is power. You can choose to challenge yourself in your depth, in your not knowing, in your authenticity. You can stop controlling yourself so others feel comfortable. You can learn that your worth doesn't rise when you meet expectations, but when you stop losing yourself. And that begins where you pause and ask, which parts of this are truly me, and which am I only still playing? It hurts to admit. You may see how much you've adapted to avoid losing love, but the price you pay is high. You lose yourself, and no one will return that part to you, except you. You're the only one who can summon the courage to untangle yourself, not by reinventing, but by stopping the hiding. Perhaps you feel naked as you start to remove the mask. Perhaps you tremble inside. Perhaps you grow more vulnerable. But you also grow freer. You breathe again. You feel again. And you will notice. You become not less, but more when you're real. Because you reclaim yourself. And no one else can do that for you. Chapter 13. The Power of Boundaries. You don't discover who you are by your dreams. You discover yourself by what you no longer allow. By the moment you stand up. When you stop going along. When you refuse to stay silent even though it would be easier. Because as long as you go along with everything, endure every ambiguity, excuse every boundary violation, swallow every disappointment, you remain invisible. Not because no one sees you, but because you don't defend yourself. Setting boundaries is not a sign of hardness. It is a sign of dignity. It is the answer to all the times you betrayed yourself to please. The silent consequence of years in which you said yes too often, even though inside you wanted to leave. It is the moment you realize you cannot be free and always available at the same time. You cannot grow if you constantly bow. You cannot heal if you remain in places that make you sick. You cannot unfold if you don't show an edge. And yes, it is uncomfortable. It will upset people. Because as long as you adapt, you're easier for many. You dodge, you cushion, you apologize, you understand, even when no one understands you. But when you begin to draw boundaries, something shifts. You're no longer the one anyone can say anything to without thinking. You're no longer the one always at hand. You become someone to be reckoned with. And that's the point. A boundary is not an attack. It is a location. It doesn't say, I am better than you. It says, I matter enough to myself. It doesn't mark where others end. It marks where you begin. And where you begin, everything changes. Your environment, your body, your time, your truth. Suddenly you no longer tolerate things you once accepted, not because you're less loving, but because you no longer sacrifice yourself out of love for others. The ability to set a boundary is not a technique. It is a process of clarification. You won't become sovereign overnight. You won't remain calm every time you draw a line. Sometimes you'll be angry, sometimes uncertain, sometimes too loud or too harsh. But that's okay. You're learning to discover yourself anew. You're learning to stand up for yourself, without drama, without self-betrayal. This is practice, not a perfection contest. Many people wait for others to notice when it's too much. They hope for consideration, sensitivity, accommodation. But that's a mistake. Protecting you is not the world's job. It's yours. Not out of mistrust, but out of responsibility. Because only you know what betrays you inside. Only you feel when things tip. Only you can say, up to here and no further. And yes, sometimes you will collide. Some will call you selfish, harsh, sensitive. But what they see isn't your boundary. They see their own lack of freedom. Because whoever loses you, because you protect yourself, never respected you, only consumed you. And whoever attacks you, because you take yourself seriously, shows how long you didn't take yourself seriously. Boundaries are uncomfortable because they demand clarity, and clarity is exhausting. It means you no longer tolerate everything. You no longer suffer in silence. You no longer wait for things to get better when they're long past. Clarity means you take responsibility, not only for your well-being, but also for your discomfort. You stop dodging when asked how you feel. You stop being polite when you're angry. You learn to say no without explaining yourself. This kind of clarity costs relationships. It destroys illusions. It shifts dynamics where you were the caretaker, the understanding one, the reliable one. But it gives you back something you lost long ago. Respect. Not as a reaction, but as an inner feeling. You begin to take yourself seriously. And that changes everything. Setting boundaries does not mean locking people out. It means no longer surrendering yourself. It means you stay, even when it gets uncomfortable. It means you remain, even if others abandon you. It means you protect yourself, not against the world, but for yourself. When you reach this point, something inside you shifts. You become calmer. Not because everything is peaceful, but because you no longer betray yourself to keep harmony. You become more powerful. Not by raising your voice, but by feeling that you matter. That your space matters. Your opinion matters. Your boundary matters. And you'll notice, not everyone will like it. But those who stay will meet you differently, more honestly, more deeply, more truly. Boundaries aren't retreat. They're a commitment to you, to your truth, to your path. Chapter 14. The I am that acts when no one is watching. It's easy to define yourself as long as someone is watching. You can say who you are. You can present yourself, explain yourself, put yourself in the spotlight with the right words, the right tone, the image you want to project. And that isn't wrong. We all do it. We all want to be understood, to be seen, to come across well. But that doesn't reveal who you truly are, because what you show often arises in the mirror of others. What really counts is what you do when no one is looking. Your true I am shows not in your words, but in your actions when you're unobserved. In moments when you know no one is judging you, when there's no applause, no scrutiny, no feedback, just you. And it's precisely there that what you truly live emerges. Not what you claim to believe, but what you actually embody. In your core, in your thinking, in your integrity. Because it's easy to appear strong when someone's watching. Easy to be empathetic with recognition. Easy to behave morally under observation. But what happens when there's no one to affirm you? What do you do when there's no immediate consequence? How do you speak to yourself when you're alone? How do you handle anger when no one sees it? How do you handle power when nobody can take it away? The I am you truly live shows in decisions made without inspection, in how you treat your body, your time, your word. It shows when you keep your promises to yourself, even if no one reminds you. When you don't degrade yourself simply because there's no one to uphold you. And that's hard, because we're used to performing for others. We live for external impact. Yet there's a quiet truth that escapes control, an inner honesty that isn't loud but consistent, that doesn't judge but observes. And you know when you betray it. You feel it, in how you feel afterward, in the subtle crack that remains when you undercut yourself. Maybe you're generous with others but stingy with yourself. Maybe you appear strong but crumble under unspoken expectations. Maybe you strive to be a good person but know precisely where you're not fully sincere. And that's not shameful. It's a call for clarity. Because what you do when unobserved shapes you in a way no external image can compensate. It shows whether your inner system is congruent, whether your words align with your deeds, whether you can trust yourself, not because you're perfect, but because you try, honestly, quietly, for yourself. Integrity doesn't begin where you're praised. It begins where there's no one to prove anything to, where you're alone with your possibilities, your limits, your responsibility. And it's precisely there that it's decided whether your I am is an idea or a reality. It's comfortable to craft an image that feels good. You can say you're mindful, but what do you do with your phone when you wake up? You can say you're consistent, but how often do you break your own rules without questioning? You can say you're honest, but what do you hide from yourself? These questions are uncomfortable. They don't point a finger at a wound. They simply reveal where you're not yet living your truth. And this isn't an accusation. It's an invitation. Not to self-condemnation, but to sincerity. You don't have to pretend you've arrived, but you should know where you're headed. And you recognize that by how you behave when no one's watching. When no one can stop you from taking shortcuts, lying, avoiding, and you still don't. Not out of fear, but out of principle. You'll never be 100% congruent. But you can become a little more each day the person you yourself would trust. You can start noticing what you do when unobserved. Not out of mistrust, but out of respect. You're the only person you'll spend your whole life with. You're the one whose voice you always hear, whether you want to or not. And eventually you want that voice to be clear, calm, coherent, authentic. Your I am reveals itself in the small things, in the choice to look away or to meet your gaze, to make excuses or to stand your ground, to take yourself seriously even if no one else does. That's not a show. It's the foundation. And if you're honest there, you no longer need an audience. Chapter 15. Even the body tells who you are. Your body doesn't lie. It doesn't think, analyze, or argue with you. It carries you. It remembers. It reacts. And it tells the truth long before you're ready to admit it to yourself. While you present yourself outwardly, explaining your world with words, a second, much older system runs within. One that stores what you suppress. One that reacts when you betray yourself. One that lets you feel whether you're still on your path or long since lost your way. You can discipline yourself, disguise yourself, fool others. But your body doesn't play along. It sends signals. It withdraws when you ignore yourself. It tenses when you force yourself to stay where you should have left long ago. It grows heavy when you've been strong too long. It grows restless when you suppress what wants to surface. If you don't listen, it grows louder. Not out of spite, but because it protects you when you can no longer protect yourself. What you call a symptom is often a message. A boundary you've crossed. A truth you've long ignored. Your back, perpetually tense because you've straightened yourself out inside while longing to collapse. Your stomach, tying itself in knots when you swallow what you can no longer digest. Your neck, stiffening because you keep your head high even though you're exhausted inside. You try to treat it with pills, distractions, tactics. But real healing begins elsewhere, with listening. Your body doesn't just tell you how you feel. It tells you who you've become, whether you're open or closed, whether you dare to breathe or hold your breath, whether you occupy space or make yourself small. Every step, every glance, every gesture tells your story, even when you think it's forgotten. Sometimes it's not your mind that betrays you, but your gait, your tone, the way you move when you believe no one sees. Maybe you learn to control yourself, your posture, your expression, your demeanor, perfectly measured, perfectly adapted. You've become adept at showing nothing unwanted. But your body stays honest. It can't suppress what you feel forever. It shows the pressure, the trembling, the tension you can no longer hide with words. And that isn't a flaw. It's an invitation, not to analysis, but to connection. You don't have to understand every message from your body, but you must stop ignoring it. It's not your tool, it's your home. And your home deserves attention, not only when it malfunctions, but especially when you lose yourself in the everyday. When you no longer feel yourself, defining yourself only by performance, and your body merely functions so you can keep going. Reconnecting with your body doesn't mean eating perfectly, training perfectly, or relaxing perfectly. It means feeling yourself again, not only in moments of calm, but in the midst of noise, conflict, emotion. It means no longer overriding yourself. It means asking how you breathe when you defend yourself, how you stand when you feel ashamed, how you react when you're hurt, and what happens in your body when you finally decide to stand up for yourself. Your body is not your enemy when it forces you to slow down. It is your compass. It shows where your boundary lies, not on paper, but in reality. It shows how much energy you expend pretending, and it shows how much lighter it becomes when you begin to be yourself. It's no accident that genuine people often move more freely, stand more upright, seem more present, breathe more deeply, not because they do more, but because they hold back less. Perhaps your body was long a place you avoided, seeing it as a weakness, as too loud, as not good enough. Perhaps you reduced it to appearance, performance, control. But it was never your enemy. It carried you through every crisis. It was silent when words failed you. It was expression when you couldn't show yourself. And it never left you, even when you most forgot it. If today you begin returning to this body, not as a functional unit, but as an ally, you'll notice you become more than physically present. You become more whole. Your I am doesn't end with your mind. It lives in your posture, your presence, in the way you occupy space, in the way you move when you remember you are here, complete, tangible, real. Chapter 16. The price of standstill. Not deciding is also a decision, and not changing has consequences, even if you tell yourself you're just waiting. Standstill sounds harmless, almost neutral, like a pause, like a moment to catch your breath. But the truth is, standstill comes at a cost. Not immediately, but gradually. It devours energy, it undermines trust, and it deafens you to what you've long known but refuse to act on. You feel it when something in your life no longer fits. It starts quietly, a discomfort, an inner tug. You ignore it. You tell yourself it's just a phase. You keep functioning. And while you strain to look away, what you most want to avoid grows inside you. A gap between what you live and what you need. And the longer you ignore it, the wider it becomes, until it eventually paralyzes you. Standstill is comfortable as long as you mistake it for control. As long as you convince yourself you're waiting for the right decision. As long as you say it's wiser to risk nothing than to make a mistake. But deep down you know you're not holding back by choice, but by fear. Fear of change, fear of loss, fear of facing what remains if you dare to be honest. And that very fear has its price. It keeps you in relationships that no longer touch you. It keeps you in jobs where you're dying of thirst inside. It drives you to postpone your truth until you can no longer feel it yourself. And you tell yourself that's reasonable, stable, adult. But in reality, it's standstill, disguised as security. The problem isn't that you can't change. The problem is that you've grown accustomed to never trying. You've learned to settle into states that drain you. You've learned to shape compromises so they sound like decisions. But you feel the gap. You feel the exhaustion. You feel the boredom that isn't rest but inner absence. And then you start watching other people's lives. Those who quit their jobs. Those who set boundaries. Those who dared to change. And you either admire them or criticize them. But what really moves you isn't what they do. It's what you don't do. It's the friction between what you feel inside and how you live each day. And that friction won't disappear just because you ignore it. Change isn't a risk, it's a necessity. Because life is constantly in motion. And when you cling to something while everything else moves, you eventually lose touch with yourself. You stand still not out of strength but out of fear. And fear loves to hide, as reason, as consideration, as realism. But beneath the surface, it's nothing but a refusal to take responsibility. The price of standstill is high. You pay with your vitality, with your clarity, with your self-respect. You grow smaller on the inside, even if you appear to hold your ground. You become rigid, even if you try to look flexible. And you grow louder, because deep down you know your silence is eating you alive. You grow cynical, impatient, defensive. Not because that's who you are, but because that's who you become when you stop taking yourself seriously. It takes courage to change. But it takes even more courage to look honestly at how comfortable you've become with standstill, with enduring, with merely functioning, with living at half speed. And at some point, excuses aren't enough anymore. At some point, you want to feel yourself again. Not dramatically, not impulsively, just genuinely. In motion, in growth, in contact with what you need, not just with what you can tolerate. You don't have to turn everything upside down at once. You don't have to be radical, but you must move. In your thoughts, in your feelings, in your actions. You must stop numbing yourself with stories that no longer hold you up. You must be willing to close one chapter, even if you haven't yet written the next paragraph. Because what propels you forward isn't a guarantee. It's the willingness to stop lying to yourself. If you don't change, life will change anyway. It moves on. It leaves you behind. Not to punish you, but simply because it can't be stopped. And you get to choose whether you swim with the current or cling to a bank that's long since eroded. But know this, those who cling grow weary. Those who move stay alive. You will make mistakes. You will feel insecure. You may sometimes regret, but you will be there, awake, real, connected. And that's the price worth paying, not the price of perfection. The price of honesty. Chapter 17. I am what I hold in chaos. It's easy to talk about strength when everything's working. It's simple to show clarity when you've slept well, when things are running smoothly, when your surroundings support you. But life doesn't measure you in moments of order. It tests you in the storm, in uncertainty, in the nights when you have no bearings yet keep going. In the days when you doubt, struggle, fall, and still choose to stand up, without knowing how much strength you have left. What you think about yourself in silence matters. But what you carry in chaos reveals who you really are. Not your role, not your reputation, not your goals, but what you cling to when every fiber of your being screams to give up. The truth is, your I am doesn't emerge when you shine. It emerges when you bleed. And don't run away. When you don't lose yourself, even though everything inside you urges retreat. Chaos takes many forms. Sometimes it's external, crises, breakups, losses. Sometimes it's quiet, an inner tremor no one sees. a silence louder than any conflict, and sometimes it hits without warning. No clear beginning, no clear end. Just that tilt, that unrest, that feeling the ground beneath you is slipping away. In those moments, you want something to hold on to. You look for it outside, in people, in opinions, in systems. But what truly carries you isn't out there. It's what you refuse to give up deep inside, even when you question everything. It's the one phrase you repeat to yourself when you don't know what to do next. It's the one value you hold on to, even when it's uncomfortable. It's the decision not to betray yourself, not even when no one's watching. Some people lose their mask in chaos, and others finally show their truth. Not because they aren't afraid, but because they know that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is acting deliberately, even when it hurts, even when there's no guarantee, even when the price is high. And right there, in that fine line between flight and steadfastness, something real is born. No heroics, no performance, just a calm, clear I am. Perhaps you felt it, that inner tremble when you knew you could back down. You could adapt, apologize, retreat. But you didn't. Not out of pride, out of dignity, out of something deeper than any argument. You felt, if I lose myself now, I'll never find me again. And you stayed, steadfast, vulnerable, genuine. Chaos shows you what truly matters. It strips away control but gives you truth. It forces you to release the non-essentials, expectations, facades, demands. And if you're willing not to collapse in that chaos but to observe, you'll see. Not everything you cling to belongs to you. And not everything that slips away is a loss. Your I am amid chaos is like an anchor you barely notice while the water's calm. But when the storm comes, it shows whether you've truly grounded it or merely claimed you have. It shows whether you only quote your values or live them. Whether you stand by yourself when no one praises you. Whether you remain sincere when every instinct urges you to play it safe. And maybe you realize now that you're in such a moment, that your life isn't predictable right now, that you're tired, uncertain, and you wonder if you're strong enough. But that isn't the question. The question is, what are you willing to hold on to, no matter what? Your integrity, your gentleness, your voice. What remains when nothing else does? You will lose people if you don't bend in chaos. You will miss opportunities if you stay true to yourself. You will have sleepless nights if you refuse to go with the flow. But you will look yourself in the eye each morning, without excuse. You'll know you didn't sell yourself out, that you didn't concede at any price, that you didn't step over anyone, even when it would have been easier. And that is where your value lies, not in the facade, not in the plan, but in resistance, in the choice not to forget who you are in chaos, in the ability to stay clear when everything blurs, in the willingness not to abandon yourself, even though you could. Maybe that is the essence of identity. Not who you'd be if everything were perfect, but who you are when nothing goes as you imagined. When you still rise, still speak the truth, still remain soft. Not perfect, but authentic. Chapter 18. Being doesn't mean thinking, it means acting. You can spend 10 years thinking about yourself, reading books, studying theories, listening to guided meditations, analyzing your inner circle, doing shadow work, dissecting your family of origin, and naming every trigger. You can talk about yourself as if you were a research project, structured, reflective, eloquent. But none of that matters if you don't live out what you've discovered. Thinking changes nothing unless it turns into action. And this is where most people get stuck. In the idea of transformation, in the speaking about growth, in the notion of the self. But who you are doesn't show in your thoughts. It shows in your deeds. Not in what you might do tomorrow, once you feel ready, but in what you do today, even though you still feel uncertain. In the moment you start to act, even though your head offers 1,000 reasons not to, because you know your truth doesn't arise in thinking, it arises in moving. Many people get stuck in reflection because they believe it's responsible to understand everything before deciding. They say, "I need more time. I have to process this. I don't want to rush." And sometimes they're right, but often that's just camouflage for fear. Fear of consequence, fear of clarity, fear of change becoming real the moment you act. Because in thought you feel safe. In thought you can play out every scenario. In thought there's no risk, but also no life. The I you believe yourself to be doesn't reveal itself in your analyses, but in how you react in challenging moments. Whether you stand up when you fall, whether you stay honest when it gets uncomfortable, whether you speak when silence would be easier, whether you move when standstill paralyzes you. You won't be judged by your theory, but by your execution. It's not about how deeply you reflect. It's about whether you start to change where it really matters. And this doesn't mean you should act impulsively. It means you must eventually stop hiding behind thoughts. The clarity you seek won't emerge through thinking. It will reveal itself when you're willing to take a risk, when you're ready to fail, when you're ready to err, correct, begin again, without self-judgment. Because real life doesn't happen in your head. It happens in your presence. In the choice to stop watching your own potential unfold. You won't become who you are by thinking about it. You become who you are by trying, by showing up, by rubbing up against reality, by straightening up, perhaps uncertain, perhaps trembling, but genuine. Because the world doesn't need more people who understand themselves perfectly. It needs people who are willing to live out what they already know. Many wait for the ideal moment, for perfect timing, for the day they feel ready. But that day never comes. Not because you're not enough, but because readiness doesn't arrive beforehand. It emerges in doing. You don't grow through analysis. You grow by daring life to meet you, even if you're not sure it will catch you. And yes, acting makes you vulnerable. It makes you visible. It makes you open to attack, but it also makes you real. You'll no longer be perceived as someone who just thinks a lot, but as someone who lives what they say. And that changes everything. Because your integrity isn't born in your head. It's born in the alignment of word and deed, of insight and application, of intention and action. Maybe you don't need to know everything today, but you need to start living what you already know. You know which conversations you're avoiding. You know which decisions are overdue. You know which boundaries you should set. You don't need more insight. You need movement. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel stronger. Now. Imperfect. Human. But honest. Because you won't remember all the thoughts you had. You'll remember what you did. What you dared to do. What you stood up for, even when it was uncomfortable. And that is what will make you who you are. Not perfect, not invulnerable, but clear, genuine, alive. Chapter 19. I am because I decide to be. You are not what has happened to you. You are not what others have made of you. You are not the product of your circumstances, your origin, your mistakes, or your successes. You are what you choose to be today. In every moment you decide how to respond to what comes your way. Not theoretically, not someday, but concretely, tangibly, consciously. Life isn't a neutral sequence of events. It's a constant dialogue between what happens to you and what you make of it. And in that dialogue, your identity isn't formed by chance, but by choice. You choose whether to open or to close. You choose whether to take responsibility or to hide behind excuses. You choose whether to stay soft, even when you've been hurt, or to harden, because it seems easier. and each of those decisions writes a line in the story of who you become. Some believe the I am is something you must discover inside, some deep, fixed essence you just have to unearth like treasure. But that's not how it works. It's not about uncovering who you really are, as if there were something pure and unchanging inside you. It's about consciously crafting who you want to be, day after day, in the tension between past and possibility. Identity isn't a state, it's a process. And this process demands that you repeatedly choose not to be driven by old patterns, by expectations, by the fear of rejection. It demands that you let go of your old stories, not to deny them, but so you don't stay stuck in them. Because you can't be yourself if you only react to what others expect you to be. You only become free when you start valuing your own voice above the echoes around you. There will be days when you feel like a compromise of yourself. Moments when you've tried so hard to fit that you no longer recognize yourself. And then you choose whether to keep bending or to stop apologizing for who you really are. You choose whether to stay small for the sake of harmony or to stand tall, even if it's uncomfortable. This choice is often quiet. No drama, no grand gestures. It's the decision to stay clear, even when the price is high. The decision to listen to yourself, even if others don't understand. The decision to be yourself in a room full of people who'd rather see you play a role. And you'll notice, not everyone will like it, but you won't lose yourself. Your I am gains strength when you decide not to let it depend on external validation. When you don't wait for someone else to tell you you're right before taking yourself seriously. When you stop making your worth contingent on what people believe you can or cannot do. It's an act of self-empowerment to refuse to be limited by your past, and instead to grow through your attitude. And yes, there will be days when you slip back. When you forget what you promised yourself. When you fit in again. Retreat. Remain silent when you intended to speak. But even that is part of your choice. You choose whether to judge yourself for it, or to start anew, without drama, without self-hatred, but with the clarity that you can decide every day who you are. Because no one is you but you. No one can live in your name. No one can make the choice to be yourself for you. Not even those who love you. They can see you, strengthen you, accompany you. But the decision not to abandon yourself when it matters most is yours alone. There is no ideal moment for this. You will never be finished, never completely sure, never perfectly confident. But you don't have to be. It's enough to choose today one thing that aligns with your truth. To take one action that says, I take myself seriously. I stand up for myself. I will no longer shrink to fit. And from that single act arises attitude. From attitude arises identity. And from identity arises a life that no longer feels like a performance. You are what you choose, not in thoughts, but in consequences. Not in theories, but in everyday life. Not when everything is easy, but when you have no more excuses to forget yourself. And right there, in the concrete, in the human, in the sometimes unfinished, lies your power. Not perfect, not constant, but genuine, palpable, alive. Chapter 20. Who are you today, really? There is a moment that isn't loud. No crash, no triumph, no enlightened insight. Just an inner silence in which you look at yourself. Without mask, without label, without defenses. You sit there, alone with yourself, and everything you thought you knew steps aside for a moment. What remains is a question that doesn't need to be asked because it vibrates throughout your body. Who are you, today, now, in this moment, really? Not who you were, not what you wanted, not what others have given or denied you, not the story you tell yourself to justify your actions, but you, as you function, react, feel, decide today. You, with your light and shadow sides, with what you achieve and what you still avoid. You, in your true state, not in the ideal image, not in the draft, not in the wish. And that is where real courage begins. Not in change, not in vision, but in acknowledgement, in honest observation, without judgment. You don't have to dissect yourself, pathologize yourself, or justify yourself. You only have to be willing to see what is. And that is harder than it sounds. Because we all carry images of ourselves we want to maintain. Strong, smart, evolved, good images. But sometimes they don't match reality, or no longer do, or not entirely. Sometimes you're not who you pretend to be. Not out of ill will, but out of habit. Out of loyalty to an old story. Out of fear of losing yourself if you admit you've changed, or need to change. But the longer you hold on, the further you stray from the possibility of truly arriving at yourself. Who you are today doesn't show in your resume, your status, or your plans. It shows in your honesty when you're alone, in the degree of responsibility you take for yourself, in your capacity to love others without losing yourself, in how you treat your limits, your pain, your longing. It shows not in your perfection, but in your presence. Perhaps you notice you've defined yourself too long by something you no longer want. A job that once gave you purpose but now drains you. A relationship that should have held you up but keeps you small. A self-image that once made you proud but now prevents you from softening. And maybe today is the moment you say, "That's not me anymore." Or, "Maybe I was that, but I want to become someone else." But before you take that step, you need the mirror of truth. Not the physical mirror, but the honest one. You must dare to stop lying to yourself, to stop explaining, to stop concealing. You must ask yourself, what am I actually living? And does that match what I carry inside? How do I speak? And does it reflect what I truly stand for? How do I treat myself? With harshness or with dignity? Often we don't recognize ourselves because we're so busy functioning. We live on autopilot. We keep going. We react. But eventually the question catches up with you. Maybe in a crisis. Maybe in the middle of the night. Maybe when you notice your smile feels forced, even though everything seems fine. And then the question arrives, not as a reproach, as an opportunity. Because the good news is, it's never too late to choose yourself. Not as the version you wish you were, but as the one who's possible today. Honest, real, with everything that comes with it. You don't have to be finished. You don't have to be ideal. You only have to stop ignoring yourself and be ready to begin again. Not at zero, but at you. Perhaps that is the bravest act of all, to stop telling your story and finally start living it. Not in the light of expectations, but in the shadow of your truth. Not for others, but for yourself. And not to shine, but to arrive. Because who you are today isn't decided by your surroundings, not by your bank balance, not by your past, but by you. In the moment you stop hiding, in the moment you say, "I am, as I am today, and I choose what comes next, not tomorrow, but now." We've now reached the end. If anything in this audiobook has moved you, shaken you up, or made you rethink, then it's already done its job. If you'd like more content like this, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. Share it with people you know need to hear it. And above all, listen again whenever you feel you need it. Sometimes on the second pass you understand exactly what you weren't ready for the first time.